So I wanted to do a quick comparison review between the Moto X and the 2014 Moto G. This is obviously the 2013 Moto X. So it was yesterday's flagship against this budget offering from Motorola for 2014. I have to say, using both devices, I think that I prefer certain aspects of each one over the other, and it's been quite difficult for me to come to terms with which one I like the most. You can get the Moto G for about 140 quid unlocked in the UK, whereas the Moto X, I think that's about 250. But you can get it for cheaper if you import it from China, which I've seen it for as low as 150 quid on eBay. But then again, you have to think about warranty issues and all that. But which one offers a better overall experience? We can have a look in this video. So straight off the bat, I'd say that in terms of the feel in the hand and the comfort levels, I'd give it to the Moto X, simply because it feels a lot thinner, as well as like more ergonomic in the hand. It is a bit smaller, obviously, so you don't get as much screen real estate. But I think that Motorola really nailed it when it came to the ergonomics of the Moto X. And since it is supposedly, a more premium device, it is going to feel that little bit better. That's not to say that the Moto G doesn't feel solid. It feels solid in itself, with the huge 5-inch display, which is curved, so it does help, remove some of that heft. But it is quite a thumb stretching device. If you're used to smaller devices, you are going to, really feel that kind of heft in your pocket. It is a bit thicker than the Moto X as well, which, as you can see, is very thin. Not too much thicker, but a little bit thicker nevertheless. And you also have those removable back covers on the Moto G, which some people may find that it does make the device click a little bit at the top or the bottom. Maybe it's just my device, but I have noticed it now and again, whereas you don't get that on the Moto X because it is sealed in there, the battery, etc. Well, the battery is sealed on both of them, in fact, but it doesn't have a removable back like the Moto G. But I think that the back does feel more premium as well compared to the Moto G. It just has that nice texture on the back, whereas the Moto G just feels a little bit cheaper, a bit Nexus 5y kind of thing. But they both feel, quite solid, better than what you get on a plasticky device from LG or, Samsung kind of thing. They have obviously slight differences in regards to the arrangement of the stuff on the device, such as the speaker. You still have your speaker on the back with the Moto X, whereas the Moto G has them on the front now. So that's going to help you when it comes to really hearing your songs, etc. I've heard some reviews saying that the Moto X still has a louder speaker, but because it is on the back, obviously it's going to be muffled a little bit, so it's not the best place to put it. In terms of the button arrangement, quite similar really. On the sides there, no physical shutter button, but I think that the buttons feel solid on the Moto X, much more solid than they do on the Moto G. They're a bit plasticky, if I'm to be honest. It was a bit of a gripe with the 2013 one that I had as well. But both, I think, have two front-facing cameras of 2 megapixels. That's up from 1.1 something or other on the Moto G from last year, so a little bit better there. Moto X comes with its clear pixel 10 megapixel camera, which supposedly lets in more light through having bigger pixel size, and the Moto G has its 8 megapixel camera, which is a f2.0 lens, which should improve low light capability compared to last year's 5 megapixel camera. And in terms of the actual quality of those two, I can show you some examples later on in the video, just so you can make your mind up. Personally, I think that the Moto G takes quite a few really surprisingly good pictures, which rival the Moto X, but I can show you that a bit more later. So in terms of which one I prefer, in terms of the look, I'll probably just give it to the Moto X still. It just feels a little bit more comfortable in the hand. I think that the Moto G is nice in itself, but it is a budget device, and it does come across as that a little bit with the plasticky buttons and the slightly chunkiness of it. But they still have made some excellent design choices when it comes to the speaker, and I do like the way that the screen is bigger than the Moto X. But talking about that screen, you can see that the bezel on the Moto X is a little bit thinner, so it would have been nice if Motorola had really stretched that screen out so that you could make the whole device a little bit smaller. You're looking at different technologies, with the Moto G sporting its 720p LCD IPS display, which I've already praised quite a bit on the review. Really, I can't really see much difference between it and your Nexus 5 kind of thing. It has very nice color accuracy and viewing angles, and the text appears very crisp even though it's not full HD. It's a very nice display, which most people will be very happy with. Not the best display, not as good as some of the flagships that cost 500 quid, but hey ho, it's a quarter of the price. Whereas the Moto X, I'm still a big fan of the Moto X screen. It is a bit smaller, which I'm probably a little bit more fond of bigger screens now, but it's AMOLED display, and I love my AMOLED displays. You get those really kind of deep blacks on the Moto X. You can probably see there how deep it is. You can't even see the border, whereas you can see the border on the Moto G. So if you're a fan of your deep, high contrasty, almost cartoonish colours, then Moto X is the way to go. But if you like your realistic colours and a slightly bigger screen, then you'll certainly like what the Moto G is bringing to the table. In terms of viewability outdoors, I'd say they're about equal, if I'm to be honest, because naturally, LCD IPS does look more viewable outdoors compared to AMOLED, just because of the technology. But the screen is a bit dimmer on the Moto G at 300 nits compared to the Moto X, which has a brighter screen in general. So they kind of cancel each other out in terms of screen viewability outdoors. They're both about the same. But it doesn't mean that the Moto G is dim by any stretch of the imagination. As you can see, I've got a third-party brightness app there because I think it's a bit better than the inbuilt one. But as you can see, that gets quite bright when you have it bumped up to the max. And the same can be said for the Moto X. You can barely see it gets so bright. But both, I'm a big fan of both screens, to be honest. Got no issues whatsoever. And I'm going to put that on a little bit lower, I think. There we go. So yeah, it just depends on whether you like AMOLED or LCD, really. In terms of the software, I think that Motorola wanted to make the Moto G more like the Nexus devices, as they went away from the traditional Motorola launcher with the black background and put Google Now launcher on. Now, personally, I think that while I like the stock look of the Google Now launcher, I think that it's a bit buggy compared to Nova Launcher Prime, which I'm a big fan of, and I've got both on both devices actually. So as you can see, if you go back and forth with the Google Now launcher, it seems to lag a bit, and you are running quite basic specifications, but it shouldn't really lag that much. Yeah. So look, you can see that there's very little lags going back and forth, and that's why I like Nova Launch my device. Someone asked me, so I just wanted to clarify that. But in terms of the software on both of them, I'm a big fan of it. You're not going to get any overlay bogging down the experience. Both very nice stock devices. I think that the launcher on the Moto X is very stable. I've only changed to the Nova launcher on there because I can resize the widgets a little bit to make them a bit bigger, because they are quite small on the stock one. But overall, I like the launcher that the phone comes with more than Google Now launcher. But other than that, you get different little tweaks that Motorola put on the device. However, Motorola does seem to keep most of its stuff, like premium stuff, on the Moto X line of phones, and that includes your active display, which is really excellent feature, something that I can barely do without now. So if you just put your hand over it, it comes up with the notifications, and you can then just go into it and without even having to unlock the phone, and that saves a lot of battery life, whereas you don't get that on the Moto G, unfortunately, and you don't get any double tap or anything. So it feels a bit old-fashioned clicking that and then going into it, but it's not too bad. I do understand why Motorola wants you to buy its high-end devices for the best features, and you've got also the excellent touchless controls, which allow you to issue commands to the Moto X when you're not even in the room if your voice is loud enough. So you can actually do commands as well on the Moto G from the home screen, for example, when you've got that search bar on, but it won't work if the phone's off, unlike the Moto X. Okay, Google Now. So you just got to bear that in mind, really, if you're looking at buying one of these two devices. If you like the look of talking to your device as well as the active notifications, you're not going to get any of that on the Moto G, unfortunately. But it's worth mentioning you can, if you've got the phone on, you can set it so that it is listening on literally every screen as well as the lock screen. So you can have a kind of touchless control light experience on the Moto G. But you do get Motorola Assist, which is very useful for reading out your text when you're driving, as well as automatically silencing the phone when you want to go to bed at night, which is nice. You get that on the Moto X as well. So I'm not sure if you get spotlight stories on the Moto G. I don't think you do. You do get that on the Moto X, which these are just like little kind of games that you can play, which don't think Motorola have pushed out a new one quite recently, but was quite fun at first when they put that on. But one area where the Moto X really does pull ahead is in terms of the raw specifications. You've got your Motorola X8 computing chip in there, which is a dual-core Snapdragon S4 Pro, clocked at 1.7 gigahertz. I think I've read somewhere it's considered to be a Snapdragon 600, but I'm not 100% sure about that. And the Moto G, you know, Snapdragon 400, 1 gig of RAM, so very basic kind of specs there. But in day-to-day usage, I've not found it to be too much of an issue really, unless you're really heavily multitasking it. I think that's where the Moto X, you can really get away with doing a lot of different stuff. Although the quad core, theoretically on the Moto G, should be able to handle multitasking a bit better than the Moto X. But I've not really seen much of an improvement over the Moto X, to be honest. So I'm just starting Antutu here. Both of them started at the same time. You can trust me. It looks like the Moto X is just pulling ahead a little bit. So Moto X still pushing forward, getting to the graphical part, whereas the Moto G is lagging behind a little bit. As you can see, it seems to be very smooth on the Moto X, which I think the Moto G only has a Adreno 301 or something like that. Very jerky. Definitely not the sort of device you want if you want your gaming, your high-end gaming, shall we say. It does look a lot more jerky than what I was expecting. Probably some sort of software issues that need to be ironed out. But you can see that Moto X is finished, and it's no speed demon itself, but it posts a respectable 26,978 compared to the Moto G, which is at 17,112. So Moto X still pushing ahead there in terms of the raw synthetics, but as we know, that's not everything. So I'm just going to cancel everything now and just do some quick app opening tests. So start with maps, both on high accuracy. So it seems that the Moto G won there, no questions asked. What about web browsing? That was virtually the same in terms of page loading. Moto X seems to be still loading some components there. Again, virtually the same there. Very responsive on the Moto X, but less so on the Moto G. As you saw there, major kind of lag. Let's go back. You can see the Moto X is very responsive quite quickly, whereas the Moto G is struggling. But once it has loaded, it is quite responsive. Not going to be too hard on it. So I'd give that Moto X in terms of the web browsing. You can try some apps. I think the Moto X won that one. No questions asked. How about going into the camera? Oh, let's get rid of that. What am I doing? Go into the camera. Moto X just came up there. Probably didn't notice it, but it did. What else? Chromecast. So about the same there. XDA. Moto X, I think there, just about. So I think in terms of raw performance, it just speaks for itself really. You're going to get that raw performance from the Moto X in terms of the CPU and the 2 gigs of RAM. However, I think that the Moto G does have little advantages itself, such as micro SD expandability. You're stuck with 16 gig or 32 gig on the Moto X. And if you're looking for a comparison between this device and these two devices, because they're at similar price points, then you're going to be looking at the 16 gig Moto X, because the 32 gig one is more expensive. Some other advantages the Moto X has over the Moto G is 4G LTE, as well as NFC. So if you're big on your connectivity, then Moto X is the way to go. But at the end of the day, I'd say that the Moto G probably benefits with like a similar type of battery life, even though the battery is a bit smaller at 2000 mAh compared to 2200 mAh on the Moto X. I think the lack of LTE and the Snapdragon 400 probably will make it a bit of a stayer compared to the Moto X. Moto X is still a good battery device, but I think that it's got more stuff to power, like your active display, etc., which makes the Moto G probably a little bit better in terms of the battery life, at least in my limited experience. But they're both good in terms of the battery life. One thing that the Moto G can do that the Moto X can't is obviously your dual SIM setting, which is very useful, particularly for those of you who have kind of illicit activities that you want to keep hidden. You can have a different SIM in there, and switch between them quite quickly. Can't do that on the Moto X, unfortunately. I was quite pleasantly surprised with the results on the Moto G with its 8 megapixel camera. I think that while the Moto X still takes decent shots for my use, and I'm quite confident with its capabilities, it's not the best camera. I'd say that just randomly taking a shot, the Moto G seemed to pull off nicer pictures, which were a bit more brighter, a little bit more detailed, and less grainy in the edges. I think that's a particular issue with the Moto X, if we're to be honest. And also when you're taking macro shots, the Moto G seems to be a bit better with that, particularly when you've got the flash on. I'll give you a quick demonstration of that. So like you want to take a picture of something up close, and you've got the flash on. Just take that picture. You can take a picture which is perfectly usable. Still got that annoying loading thing on when you go to the gallery. I'm not sure why that happens, but you can see that you can make out what's in front of you. It's not overblown or blown out. That's a particular issue with the Moto X, which they still haven't fixed. If I do the same on the Moto X, you can see that it kind of flash just completely annihilates everything in front, making it quite difficult to get a usable shot. Which not too pleased about that, to be honest, with the Moto X. But then again, it does support full HD recording, which isn't jerky like on the Moto G. Moto G's is a little bit jerky when you kind of moving the camera around a bit. But also you've got that nice little trick with the Moto G, or Moto X should I say, where you can just shake it and camera comes on. But I'd still say for the odd snap, I do prefer the Moto G, which is quite surprising. Compared to the Moto X, it just seems to be a nicer sensor, if I'm to be honest. The colours, very nice and accurate, and there's no issues really when it comes to the camera. Whereas the Moto X can be a bit temperamental from time to time. Sometimes you can get a really nice shot with the Moto X, but other times it can leave you wanting. Those speakers, those are quite an interesting addition to the Moto G, and we can see if they make much of a difference to the sound now. So yeah, no contest there. I think every device should have front-facing speakers, particularly stereo speakers. But definitely a big fan of the Moto G's front-facing speakers. Yeah, I think that about covers it. Which one do you prefer? Personally, I think they both have some strengths and weaknesses against each other, which make it very difficult for me to choose which one I like more. But I'm going to have to give it to the Moto X still, because it's just got things which personally quite integral to me, such as your active notifications, as well as a touchless control, the 4G, as well as probably a little bit better in terms of the performance, as well as the AMOLED. I really like AMOLED screens. But Moto G has been, surprisingly good second effort from Motorola. If I didn't have another phone on me, I'd happily use this as my daily driver. I love that big screen, which is very nice and high quality for the price. Love that camera, very nice as well. Much improved over the previous one. Love those speakers, very nice just to listen to tunes without having to put your headphones in. It's just a shame that they didn't put in a little bit more RAM and Snapdragon 401 for future proofing. Maybe they'll do it on another version of it, the updated version like they did with the last Moto G. Who knows? But very happy with the device nevertheless, and hopefully you will consider it. So this has been a quick comparison review between last year's Moto X and this year's Moto G. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe or rate it, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.